In recent weeks, tensions between the United States and Iran have once again surged into the global spotlight. Former U.S. President Donald Trump, now back at the center of political influence, has issued a stern warning to Iran regarding its nuclear program. He stated that if Iran resumes its nuclear weapons development, the United States will respond faster and stronger than ever before. These remarks have sparked widespread concern across the international community, reigniting fears of a renewed confrontation between Washington and Tehran. To understand the current situation, we must revisit the origins of the U.S.-Iran nuclear dispute. In 2015, during President Barack Obama's administration, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action known as the Iran Nuclear Deal was signed between Iran and 6 major world powers. The deal aimed to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons in exchange for the lifting of economic sanctions. However, in 2018, Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the agreement, calling it a disaster and ineffective at stopping Iran's ambitions. Following the U.S. withdrawal, Iran gradually began violating the terms of the deal by increasing uranium enrichment beyond permitted levels. International watchdogs, including the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA), raised alarms, stating that Iran could be only months away from producing weapons-grade nuclear material. This development has intensified global concerns about the possibility of a nuclear-armed Iran. In response to Iran's activities, President Trump authorized a coordinated military strike in June 2025 targeting Iran's key nuclear facilities in Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan. The attack was conducted in collaboration with Israeli forces and was described by Trump as a spectacular military success. He further stated that Iran's nuclear ambitions had been completely and totally obliterated. The operation marked one of the largest stealth bomber missions ever executed. Iran's response was swift and defiant. Iranian officials condemned the attack as an act of war and promised retaliation. The country's foreign minister warned that any future aggression would be met with a response impossible to conceal. Iran also suspended cooperation with international nuclear inspectors, further isolating itself from diplomatic engagement. Meanwhile, the international community has urged both sides to exercise restraint. European leaders, the United Nations, and regional powers have called for a return to negotiations, fearing that any further escalation could destabilize the entire Middle East. Despite this, President Trump has maintained a hardline stance, insisting that Iran must completely abandon its nuclear ambitions before any talks can resume. Analysts remain divided over Trump's strategy. Some argue that military pressure may force Iran back to the negotiating table, while others warn that such actions could provoke further hostility and even war. The situation remains fluid, with both sides exchanging rhetoric but avoiding full-scale conflict for now. As global tensions rise, the world watches closely. Will diplomacy prevail, or are we on the brink of a new and dangerous chapter in U.S.-Iran relations? Only time will tell. The tension between the United States and Iran is not new. It has been decades in the making, rooted in history, ideology, and conflicting regional interests. However, much of the modern conflict surrounding Iran's nuclear ambitions can be traced back to the early 2000s, when suspicions first emerged that Iran was secretly working on a nuclear weapons program. In 2015, after years of negotiations, Iran and 6 major world powers, the United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, China, and Russia, signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JPOA). The agreement was designed to limit Iran's nuclear capabilities in exchange for the lifting of harsh economic sanctions. Iran agreed to cap its uranium enrichment, allow inspections by international observers, and reduce its stockpile of nuclear material. The deal was widely praised by the international community as a step toward peace. However, when Donald Trump became president in 2017, he took a sharply different approach. Trump consistently criticized the JPOA, calling it one of the worst and most one-sided transactions the United States has ever entered into. In 2018, despite international pressure to remain in the agreement, Trump officially withdrew. the U.S. from the deal and reimposed sweeping sanctions on Iran. His administration launched a maximum pressure campaign, aiming to force Iran to return to the table and accept a more restrictive agreement. The consequences were swift. Iran's economy suffered badly under the new sanctions, but instead of surrendering, Iran began scaling back its compliance with the deal. Over time, it increased uranium enrichment, restricted international inspections, and resumed research into advanced nuclear technology. Both sides hardened their positions, and any hope of diplomacy faded. During this time, tensions escalated dramatically. The killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in a U.S. drone strike in January 2020 brought the two nations to the brink of open war. Iran retaliated by launching missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq, injuring American troops. The situation remained fragile and unstable for the remainder of Trump's first term. When President Joe Biden took office in 2021, he expressed interest in returning to the JPOA, but negotiations proved difficult. Iran demanded the lifting of sanctions first, while the U.S. insisted on Iran's full compliance before any sanctions relief. Talks stalled repeatedly, and by the time the 2024 election season began, the situation had once again reached a critical point. Now, in 2025, with Trump back in the political spotlight and possibly preparing for another presidential run, he has reignited the issue by calling for stronger action against Iran. His supporters argue that his tough stance is necessary to prevent a nuclear crisis. Critics, however, warn that his policies are leading the world closer to another conflict in the Middle East. This background sets the stage for what we are witnessing now: rising military threats, diplomatic breakdowns, and the looming possibility of a broader regional war. As the nuclear standoff intensified, June 2025 marked a critical turning point. Citing urgent intelligence reports that Iran was nearing the final stages of building a nuclear bomb, former U.S. President Donald Trump publicly urged immediate action. Within days, coordinated military operations were launched targeting Iran's most guarded nuclear facilities. The strikes, reportedly carried out by a joint task force of U.S. and Israeli forces, focused on three main sites: Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan, key locations in Iran's nuclear infrastructure. The operations were executed with high precision, using stealth bombers, satellite-guided munitions, and advanced cyber warfare tactics to disrupt communication systems. According to U.S. military briefings, the mission succeeded in disabling Iran's uranium enrichment centrifuges and significantly delaying its ability to develop a nuclear weapon. Donald Trump described the strike as a surgical, spectacular success, and stated that the operation had completely and totally dismantled Iran's nuclear threat, at least for now. The strike was one of the largest of its kind since the Gulf War. Intelligence officials confirmed the destruction of hardened underground bunkers, while satellite imagery showed smoke and fire still rising from several Iranian facilities hours after the attack. But while Trump and his allies hailed the mission as a necessary and decisive action, international reactions were deeply divided. Some U.S. allies, particularly in the Middle East, supported the move, viewing it as a bold stance against Iranian aggression. However, European nations, the United Nations, and many global analysts warned that such strikes could provoke a wider war, destabilize the region, and make future diplomacy almost impossible. Inside Iran, the response was fierce. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei condemned the attacks, calling them acts of war that will not go unanswered. Iran's Revolutionary Guard issued a statement declaring the U.S. and Israel as legitimate military targets and promised that revenge will be swift and decisive. In the days that followed, cyberattacks hit several Israeli government websites, and missile defense systems in U.S. bases in the Gulf region were placed on high alert. Though no immediate large-scale retaliation occurred, the threat of escalation loomed heavily. Meanwhile, Trump doubled down. In a press conference held at Mar-a-Lago, he warned Iran against even thinking about retaliation, adding, "If they hit back, we'll hit 10 times harder, and next time, we won't stop." At nuclear sites, This statement sparked even more concern, as many feared that the former president was laying the groundwork for a broader conflict. At this point, world leaders began calling for urgent talks. Emergency sessions were held at the United Nations Security Council, with many members calling for restraint and mediation. Despite these efforts, neither side showed signs of backing down. As the possibility of war hung in the balance, ordinary citizens across Iran, the US, and the region braced for what might come next. Protesters gathered in major cities, some condemning Trump's aggressive tactics, others blaming the Iranian regime for bringing the crisis upon their people. This military escalation marked a new chapter in US-Iran relations, one where diplomacy was fading and the drums of war were growing louder. Following the devastating strikes on its nuclear infrastructure, Iran's response was swift, calculated, and symbolic of a nation both wounded and defiant.